tell you, I can't relax. My kid drives me nuts. The other day I told him, I says, you're young, you don't have it upstairs. He told me I'm old, I don't have it downstairs. Getting old, Johnny.
Old, huh?
I told my wife I want to die in bed. She said, again? I'm getting old. I'm not a kid anymore. I know I'm getting old. In Vegas, I played a slot machine. 3 prunes came up. I know I'm getting old. I'm at the age now, if I hear someone goes both ways, I figure it's number 1 and number 2, you know? I'm not a kid. I'm getting older, Johnny. I'm getting old. You kidding? I took a vacation, went to Mexico. I got the walks. I can't get girls anymore. You kidding?
Tough, huh?
Now, at my age, you become a hookee. No, you kidding? My age, to me, the daily double is prune juice and an enema.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Wasden Wednesday, October the 11th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Nonprofit News Now, My Take, No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, Rules for Patriots, Rules for Retrogrades, Rodney Dangerfield, Ayn Rand Quote, Patriotic Song of the Day, and SEAL Team 6. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Again, the main issue is not control-seeking bosses versus freedom-seeking workers. Very often, the person most likely to restrict the workplace freedom of one worker is another worker. Tyler Cowen. Indeed, the saddest examples of crony capitalism come today from those on an even playing field seeking to use leverage, power, and the authority of a disinterested third party to advantage themselves by restricting someone else. Those who resist right-to-work laws are case in point. Cronyism is wrong when it comes from the C-suite, and it is wrong when it comes with the cause of the laborer attached to it.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
The involuntary trader. Self-betrayal comes out of all human pores. Sigmund Freud. In my hometown in Holland, there was a little barber shop quite near the government buildings. It was owned by a small man with a gray French beard. Through the years, he had served many of the country's most important men, diplomats and cabinet ministers, proud generals and aggressive leaders of the opposition. They all wanted his service. The little barber was always very courteous and agreeable, eager to please his clients. He danced with prim, servile gestures around them while curling their hair and looking after their mustaches. As he worked, he would ask his distinguished clients polite questions. What is His Excellency so-and-so going to say about this bill? How does the Minister of State feel about that one? He was not really interested in politics at all, but the little barber knew that his clients were flattered by such questions. And then one day, a puffy, beribboned German general walked in and settled himself in the barber's chair. The Netherlands had been invaded and occupied by the Nazi hordes. Of course, our barber knew this, and he had even managed to hate the invaders for a few days. But he was innately a genteel soul, and he lathered the general's face himself and took care not to soil his uniform. On succeeding days, others of these strangely uniformed men appeared in his shop, and the little barber served them all well. The military men were followed by the brown shirts and then the green shirts of the Gestapo. The leather of the barber's chair was scuffed by the large black boots, but the little barber did not complain, and soon the occupiers considered his haircut the most fashionable and best that could be obtained in the entire city. Our barber was not too conscious of his increasing official importance. He danced attendance on his new clients with as much courtesy as he'd showed the diplomats of the old days. He was sorry that his old acquaintances had gradually disappeared, but in the past, his work had been seasonal. When Parliament was not in season, his shop had been empty. Now, his business flourished all the time. The Germans and the collaborators liked the little barber shop, the perfume, the barber's skill. Indeed, our amiable friend was well liked by the uniformed oppressors. They were, after all, thoroughly unused to friendly treatment. The barber's behavior was a welcome change from the contempt with which most of the Dutch people, those stupid, stubborn resistors, regarded them. One day the barber was invited to buy a membership card in a newly formed organization of collaborators. Our friend responded to this request as he would have to any other appeal for charity. He did not like to give, but he thought of welfare as a special tax on business. And so he resigned himself to paying as a petty, necessary annoyance. Some of his old acquaintances warned him of the consequences. He would be accused of collaboration and treason. But he pacified them by saying, I am a barber and I live as a barber. I have absolutely no interest in politics. I only want to serve my clients. When, after the bitter years of struggle and oppression, liberation came, our friend became officially known as a traitor and a collaborator. When the black-booted uniformed supermen were thrown out, their collaborating friends were imprisoned, the barber among them. After he had served a part of his sentence, a wise and forgiving judge sent our barber back to his little shop. The first excitement of liberation had passed, and people were becoming more willing to forgive those who had been collaborators because they had been weak-hearted. Our story is by no means finished. The barber came back from prison a beaten man. He had been in jail for 3 months. He could not understand what had happened to him. He brooded constantly over his shameful days in jail. An injustice had been done to him. He had served his fellow man as a well-behaved, virtuous citizen should, and he had been treated like a criminal. He felt self-righteous, abused, insulted, maltreated, and misunderstood. After all, he'd only wanted to be kind and helpful. He was a barber, nothing more. The barber could not rid himself of his bitterness and resentment. None of his former friends came to cheer him up or to sympathize with him. His old clients did not return. His sadness and depression increased daily, and in a few months, he took his own life. And so ended the adventures of the little barber who had been completely unaware of his collaboration and his treachery. I knew this man. I do not despise him, not at all. I am sure there were many such pitiful collaborators. I wonder, though, why the little barber was so unaware. Was it stupidity? Had his apparent kindness always covered up a resentment against his fellow men? Was he misled by an insidious wave of suggestion stronger than his mental capacity to resist? We will never know. This tragedy, caused perhaps by unawareness, perhaps by the inability to choose between conflicting loyalties, stimulated me to investigate the problem of the traitor. I had ample opportunity to study this question, both through my experiences with the Dutch underground during the Nazi occupation and when I was imprisoned in a Vichy detention camp. My first official analysis was made in 1943, when the Dutch government asked me to prepare a psychological report on disloyal Dutch soldiers and citizens being held in detention on the Isle of Man. I arrived at the prison after a hazardous, stormy journey in a small airplane. The prisoners were a sorry lot. I had anticipated hostility, but I had not expected to find so many weaklings, consumed by bitterness and anger. Some of them were typical of the passive, egotistic, psychopathic personality, whose motto seems to be, "Let the world go to hell, I will never conform." Others seemed to be the victims of an unbearable inner struggle, a conflict between their desire to belong to the stronger group and their resistance to this desire, a resistance which only increased their bitterness and antagonism. This was a situation which proved to me again that there are certain times when logic and discussion are no help at all. We tried over and over again to convince the semi-collaborators that they should join with us in the fight against the Nazis, but they only retreated further behind their private grudges. They even refused the cigarettes I offered them. Bad as the trip to the prison had been, the trip back was even worse. The little plane was pushed off course by strong winds. I was depressed and disgusted by my experiences, and when we finally arrived in England, both the pilot and I were sick. I had many opportunities thereafter to study spies, traitors, and subversives. My last official wartime investigation took me to a prison camp in Suriname, Dutch Guinea, where I made a collective report on all the inhabitants of the prison camp. In many of them, I could discern neurotic and even psychotic traits. But I have found that perhaps the best understanding of the problem of treason has come to me from my psychiatric work with neurotic patients who have to face a daily struggle with the little betrayals of everyday life, with their own self-betrayal, and with their ambivalent feelings toward those they should love.
And that was The Involuntary Traitor from The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades. 40 tactics to defeat the radical left.
Rule 34. Never deny being a retrograde. Looking feckless, you will be called one anyway. Peter denied Christ thrice and fooled no one, looking only a coward, fumbling and playing for time. Denying or watering down one's retrograde principles results in the worst of both worlds. The denier or mitigator forfeits both his honesty and his principle. Dishonest cowards are the denizens of no man's land. One unwilling to go to bat for his friend or to be included as a fellow traveler deserves no friends. There's nothing less honorable than selling out your own title and your own people. For all their want of principle, radicals understand this one well. Denying membership among the retrogrades comprises the ultimate form of bad optics for conservatives. It happens far too frequently in politics and culture. Remember the fair-weather friend back in the middle school cafeteria who shared your values but who always had one eye on membership in another social group? Long wistful of sexier social standing, this fair-weather friend proves the worst sort of opportunist, one who abandons his camp in the face of the first tormentor or detractor. That middle school friendship was doomed to die an early death all along, but that ignobility is reserved for middle school, right? Adult culture and politics have been ennobled by age and experience, right? No way. Conversely, true friends are stalwarts. As such, they are as rare in grown-up America as in middle school. Retrogrades are dear friends and brethren, fellows you haven't met yet. Unlike most of the other rules for retrogrades, the majority of retrogrades already know and cherish this one by instinct. Own who you are. Boldly be one of your own people. Defend your brothers at arms by proudly donning the shield and crest. All this involves a most critical distinction. In the implementation of these rules, act wholly without hesitation or apology, but avoid needless heat. Many retrogrades will be befuddled by this subtle yet vital distinction, because when wrongly understood, it sounds very much like something a moderate would say. Yet in reality, it proves to be nothing of the sort. While never denying who he is, the retrograde must choose his battles wisely. For once engaged in battle, the retrograde can never back down. The single battle that cannot be afforded is the middle school treachery of opportunistic turncoats. Become who you were born to be. A retrograde.
And that was actually Rule 34, Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by steve-deace, Chapter 6.
Chapter 6, Commandment number 5. Reverse the premise of your opponent's argument and use it against him. How many times have you watched the presidential debates in the post-Reagan years with your hands half covering your eyes, just dreading that moment when that gotcha question comes our guy's way? You can almost sense it coming too, can't you? Just when our guy seems to have the momentum and a head of steam, you know the liberal media member pretending to be an impartial moderator is going to drop the proverbial hammer right on our heads. Come on. I can't be the only grassroots conservative out there who has experienced this level of angst watching these things. Be honest with me now. Don't leave me hanging. That's what I thought. I mean, heaven forbid our Republican champion actually has the worldview and shrewd communication skills to turn the question to his advantage. I mean, we're only running for the highest office in the land here, so it's not like we should expect the best of the best to represent us or anything. At this point, our expectations are so low, we'd settle for our Republican champion to just stop ceding even more ground to the left, let alone taking some back. Too often while watching the campaigns of establishment candidates, our guy actually tries to get to the left of the questioner instead of standing up to him. For instance, you knew the 2008 campaign was over when John McCain mavericked himself all the way to the left of Barack Obama during the bailout, even going so far in one presidential debate as to call for the taxpayers to buy off all the bad home loan debt on top of paying off the TARP. I'm guessing I wasn't the only conservative who was throwing things and screaming words a Christian man should never say at the television screen as Obama got to scold McCain for demanding too much from the taxpayers on national television. We've already written about not accepting the premise of your opponent, but the next step to winning requires borrowing a technique from the martial arts, using your opponent's strength against him. In political combat, we do that by first rejecting your opponent's premise, and then we reverse his premise and we use it against him. Or as Shakespeare put it in Hamlet, to hoist someone from his own petard. Now, Reagan was a Jedi master of this technique. Here are just a couple of many famous examples. During a 1984 presidential debate with Walter Mondale, Reagan responded to mounting criticism he was too old to be president by promising he would not, quote, make his opponent's youth and inexperience an issue in this campaign. That snarky retort even drew a laugh from Mondale himself. At a press conference during his first term, ABC News chief White House correspondent Sam Donaldson asked Reagan if all the blame for the recession at the time rested alone with the Democrat-controlled Congress. Mr. Reagan, does any of the blame belong to you? Donaldson asked the president. Without skipping a beat, Reagan winsomely replied, yes, because for many years, I was a Democrat. While there may never be another Reagan, Texas Senator Ted Cruz looks like the closest thing we've had since, there is no reason why we can't do a better job of hoisting the opposition from its own petard. But to do so requires some of that 3D thinking I referred to in the introduction. You cannot successfully reverse your opponent's premise if you accept it. And unless you know why you believe what you believe, you will accept your opponent's premise more times than not. In the first Reagan example we just cited, notice he rejects the premise outright that he's too old for the job. So instead of arguing his qualifications, he makes a crack, undercutting the qualifications of his opponent. But Steve, some of you will say, aren't we tired of politicians who won't answer the question they were asked? Yes, but if the premise of the question is flawed, you should never dignify it with an answer. Gotcha questions with no attempt to address anything substantive are the left's version of, did you beat your wife last night? Once you start going down that rabbit trail, you end up chasing your own tail. Instead, you need to reverse the premise and put them on the defensive. Let them know that it ain't no fun when the rabbit's got the gun. On the other hand, you also don't want to come across as evasive, which is why reversing the premise and using it against them is so key. You're turning the argument of your opponent around on them to demonstrate the total lack of substance and merit of their argument. In the second aforementioned Reagan example, he utilizes the second dimension of our 3D thinking perfectly, which is know why others believe what they believe. Reagan knew that Donaldson was a liberal. Therefore, Reagan knew that Donaldson was just looking for a gotcha question. He wasn't looking for a substantive discussion on what policies were necessary to get us out of the recession at the time. Donaldson was trying to get Reagan to use his bully pulpit to admit the recession he inherited from Jimmy Carter was his fault. That knowledge helped Reagan respond by taking Donaldson's premise and strangling him with it. Essentially, Reagan said, fine, Sam, you want me to accept blame for what big government does to stifle capitalism and free enterprise? Sure. I guess I should probably accept some of that blame for all the years I used to be a big government Democrat advocating these same failed policies myself. That, my friends, is what the kids today refer to as a walk-off shot or a mic drop. It's as automatic as Mariano Rivera coming out of the bullpen for the New York Yankees in the ninth inning to close the game. The crowd knows it's safe to head out early and get the jump on the Bronx Zoo on the way home. Good night and drive home safely. Unfortunately, most of my fellow grassroots patriots reading this are painfully aware that we have so few potential champions today capable of duplicating these examples. In a soundbite-driven society like ours, the ability to be pithy and potent while trying to persuade others to your principles is pivotal. Folks don't give you 30 minutes to make your case today. They barely give you 30 seconds. Since we communicate in such a quick draw style these days, it is imperative that we are quick on the draw in the arena of ideas. Whether it's a grassroots patriot standing up at a local Tea Party rally, one of our elected officials or candidates on a national stage, or just a conversation about politics between you and your neighbor, if you can't instantly grab the people's attention and make your case, they just move on. People are used to getting their news from Drudge's compilation of headlines and often don't read the actual article's length, or don't read beyond the first couple of paragraphs if they do. Instead of letters, we communicate with our family via Facebook status updates and with our friends in 140 characters or less on Twitter. Furthermore, the other side of the debate has already boiled down their positions to emotion-driven cliches that are easy to embed into the subconscious of our fellow Americans, i.e., a woman's right to choose, government investment, marriage equality, income equality, fairness, diversity, standing up for the middle class, etc. It's easier to communicate emotion in a pithy fashion than it is logic and reason, which is often what we base our positions on, so we're already at a disadvantage. That's why we need to be intentional about equipping one another to communicate in a way that resonates with how most of our fellow Americans receive and distribute information. One of the most effective methods of doing just that is to master the art of reversing the premise of our opponent's argument and using it against them. Let me provide a couple more examples from my own experience. I once did a TV interview where I sat in a chair and the host had 3 minutes to ask me anything that he wanted. This reoccurring segment was designed to put newsmakers on the defensive by forcing us to answer awkward or in-your-face questions off the cuff. I figured since I get to do this to newsmakers all the time, it's only fair that I put myself on the hot seat for a change. Since I'm not shy about airing my worldview, the host was aware of my socially conservative views, so he went for the jugular right away. Do you have any gay family members or friends, he asked. Now, this is the kind of question that normally makes us cringe after one of our so-called champions is asked something like this by the liberal media. The premise of the question is that people determine the moral standard, and not the moral standard itself. So if I have family members and friends who are same-sex attracted, and I live and let live with them, why don't I do this for others? After all, what's wrong with two people loving each other, right? Except I never accepted the premise of his question, and instead I turned it around on him. All of my friends and everyone in my family are either male or female, I told him. He looked puzzled and repeated his question. Everybody I know is male or female, I said. I'm not aware of a third variation of the human species, but if you discovered one, I'd get the patent on that research quick-like, because I'm guessing there's some money to be made there. At this point, it became clear he'd never run into anybody capable of doing this before, and was used to being the one framing the argument. Left with no liberal cliches to rely upon, he had to just come right out and say it now. Is anybody you know or care about currently having sex with someone of the same gender? He awkwardly asked. First, by never accepting his premise, I have forced him to accept mine, which is our gender is predetermined at birth, no matter what our desires and preferences are. Therefore, gender identity and sexual orientation are just Orwellian talking points devised to distract us from what we're really talking about here. Who someone wants to have sex with and how they want to have sex with them. This isn't about any virtue higher than men having sex with men and women having sex with women, despite the fact the anatomy of each makes that rather difficult on its own because the parts weren't designed to work that way. In addition, by making him ask his question this way, it looks like he's the one on a witch hunt and not me. Most Americans, regardless of political persuasion, have wrongly privatized sexual ethics. I heard from several people who saw the interview how they couldn't believe he was butting his nose into my private business like that. While I don't agree with that premise, I'm certainly more than willing to reverse it and use it against him. And when I did so, I went in for the kill.
And that was part 1 of Chapter 6 of Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve-Deace. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Think about something, and this happened, pastorally many times when people say, that is the lady I wanted to marry. I just had my heart set on this lady, and she broke off the engagement. I'm devastated. It's the worst suffering of my life. I'm sure of it. But because that relationship didn't work out, I met that lady whom I married and became the mother of my children and brought me a joy and a happiness that I couldn't have imagined. Does God, who sees the entirety of the universe, sometimes allow suffering to bring about a good that we cannot immediately see? We tend, understandably, when we're in pain, to narrow our focus on what we're going through. How could God allow this? Look, I don't know why God is allowing a particular pain. Maybe someday I'll see it. Maybe I won't see it until I get to heaven. But in the meantime, I trust. In the meantime, I have confidence that the God who's the Lord of heaven and earth knows what he's about.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Ayn Rand Quote of the Day.
The businessman is the man who has to use his mind to deal with reality, to study facts, to produce material goods. He is the man who serves as the transmission belt of the discoveries of science and carries the products of science to all levels of society. He is the one who takes the invention of a theoretical scientist or of an inventor, transforms them into useful products, and putting them into mass production makes them available to all levels of society. The businessman is the man who has achieved the enormous, historically miraculous rise in the standard of living of mankind during the 19th century.
And that was the Ayn Rand Quote of the Day. Back in a minute. Thank you. So I'm listening to Stuart Varney and starting a show. And again, here it is where it's just so disgusting. Our media is just shameful and disgusting. He's talking about what's going on in Israel. And he said that there's things that are going on in the villages, he said, that are really bad. He says, we won't show you the pictures. Well, thank you, God, for small favors. And he says, but we will tell you about it. Of course he will, because that's going to get him ratings. That's what people like Stuart Varney do. They make their profits off of the misery of other people. It's disgusting, and it needs to stop now. Non-profit news now. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
Right after 9/11, America and much of the world was united. Terror was morally repugnant and must be defeated. On Saturday, October 7th, Israel suffered its own 9/11. Now, as the full scale of the horror is revealed, Israel is united. The rest of the world should be too. We're not going to show you all the terrible pictures, but we'll tell you what happened as Israeli soldiers liberated the towns and villages that Hamas had attacked. A group of 7 people shot in the street. They'd just been waiting for a bus. 100 people, including some children, shot and killed at a kibbutz. Wanton killing of ordinary people doing ordinary things on a Saturday morning. Burned bodies, women raped and killed, and yes, beheaded babies. This is the depths of depravity, and it changes the equation. Israel cannot and will not let this stand. They will destroy Hamas. Atrocity motivates. America cannot let this stand. We know Iran planned and financed this terror. Cut off that support. The rest of the world should not let this stand. Some regimes will, of course, but if you can't condemn beheading babies, you are just as morally depraved as the terrorists. Democrats and Republicans must not let this stand either. The shameless squad members will object to helping Israel, the Democrats will just have to deal with them. Something just changed. These atrocities woke up the civilized world. It will be a struggle, long and bitter, but necessary. There's no going back. Liz Peake with us this morning. Beyond military support, what should we be doing to help Israel?
So that was Stuart Varney's My Take. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, SEAL Team 6.
Militiamen wielding AK-47s rode in the back of a speeding pickup truck. Fires steadily burned from piles of rubbish, metal drums, and tires. It looked like flames from hell. Turning back toward the ocean, we scouted out possible landing zones near our safe house, just in case we had to call in a helo to get out in a hurry. During our flyover, we also checked the seashore for possible locations where we could be extracted by boat. Light brown and white sand bordered the Emerald Sea. It would have been the perfect setting for a vacation resort. After coming back down to earth from our reconnaissance, we drove a Humvee from the compound through a secret hole in the back fence and up the hill to a trailer where the CIA gave us a human intelligence, HUMINT brief. Technological gizmos and doodads are useful in the spy game, but they mean little without brave human beings to infiltrate the enemy's territory and ask the right questions. Human beings who can see and hear what technology can't, who can extract meaning from the surrounding context. Using a diagram of Pasha, Little Big Man made plans for getting to the safe house and setting up. He delegated the patrol order to me and the course of action for battle stations to Casanova. Little Big Man also worked out the communications drills. Sourpuss loved the training aspect of SEAL Team 6, swimming and running. But when it came to actually operating, he fell behind us in talent and desire. Although he should have played a more central role in leading and planning, he limited his role to setting up who would stand watch on Pasha's roof at what times. The four of us also began constructing a large mosaic map of the city. Before we headed out, Crescent gave a brief. Even though my teammates and I had just met the CIA, SIGINT, and our interpreter, we would be working with them in a district in northern Mogadishu called Lido, close to the heart of where the enemy gunslingers lived. At Pasha, we would add more strangers to our team, guards, a chef, and assets, locals providing us with intelligence. If you aren't comfortable with anyone on your team, they're gone, Crescent said. This is your show. If your cover is compromised, General Garrison will get you out of there within 15 minutes. Good luck. August 29th, 1993. Under the black cloak of Sunday morning, we flew on a Black Hawk helicopter 3 miles northwest across town to the Mogadishu Stadium, Somalia's national stadium for soccer and other events, seating 35,000 people. The trip only took 5 minutes. Because it housed the Pakistani UN troops compound, we called the bullet-riddled stadium the Pakistani Stadium. From there, we loaded onto 3 indigenous trucks. Only needing 2 trucks, we used a third as a decoy, and also in the event that one broke down. Looking at the vehicles, it seemed a miracle they even ran. The Somalis used things until they were no longer mechanically viable. Then they used them some more. Someone did a pretty good job of keeping those pieces of crap running. We drove out of the stadium and into the city. Mogadishu smelled like urine and human excrement mixed with that tangible smell of starvation, disease, and hopelessness. The odor hung in the air like a dark cloud. It made my heart feel heavy. The Somalis dumped raw sewage in the streets. It didn't help that they used trash and animal dung to fuel the fires that constantly burned in rusted metal barrels. Elementary school-age boys carried AK-47 rifles. We'd heard that cholera ran rampant because of a nasty water supply. Mogadishu seemed like the end of the world in I Am Legend. Our mission was to stop the mobs of evil dark seekers and save the good Somali humans. No problem. We're SEALs. This is what we do. After driving half a mile, we arrived at Pasha. Somali guards armed with AK-47s opened the iron gates for us. Earlier, we had sent one of our assets to give them a radio in preparation for our arrival. Altogether, we had 4 guards protecting Pasha at one time. 4 others would rotate with them in shifts. All of them looked alert. Their skinny arms weren't much thicker than the width of 3 fingers, making the AK-47s appear huge in comparison. They wore T-shirts and makawis, a colorful kilt-like garment. We sped inside and the guards closed the gate behind us. Pasha stood 2 stories tall and was surrounded by an enormous concrete wall, the house of a wealthy doctor who left with his family when Somalia became too volatile for them. Somalia's widespread poverty fueled robberies, so when the concrete was originally poured for the wall around the property, the builders stuck bottles in the holes of the blocks while the concrete was still wet. When the concrete dried, the builders broke the bottle tops off. Anyone trying to climb over the wall would have to climb over broken glass. Although effective, it looked butt ugly. One evening, a shot was fired 2 houses down. Later, we found out that it came from a homeowner warding off a robber. The robbers liked to frequent our area, where the more affluent lived. Inside, the running water was fed to the faucets by gravity rather than pressure. Opening a valve allowed the water to come down from a large holding tank on the roof. The weakest shower I'd ever taken. We couldn't drink it unless we ran the water through our Katadyn pump for filtering out dangerous microbes. Sometimes we boiled the water. For the most part, we brought in cases of bottled water. By Somali standards, we were well off. I'm sure that when the doctor left, he took all the nice furniture. We had a basic table to sit around at mealtime. I had a cot-like bed made out of 2x4s and a thin mattress. Compared to living in a shack and sleeping in the dirt like most people in the city did, we lived like kings. As we quickly unpacked our gear, one of the skinny guards, probably no more than 110 pounds, bent over to pick up one of my bags that weighed at least as much as he did. I tried to take it, but he insisted I let him carry it. He put my bag on his shoulder and hiked upstairs. Our Somali chef arrived on the same day as we did. He cooked halal food, permissible by Islamic law. No pork, no alcohol, etc. Somali food is a mix of cuisines: Somalian, Ethiopian, Yemeni, Persian, Turkish, Indian, and Italian, influenced by Somalia's long trade history. For breakfast, we ate pancakes, thin and bread-like, called kanjiro. Some days we ate Indian-style porridge, bourash, with butter and sugar. At lunch, the chef made dishes from brown, long-grain basmati rice. He spiced up the aroma and taste with cloves, cinnamon, cumin, and sage. We also ate pasta, basto, served with stew and banana instead of pasta sauce. The chef cooked azuki beans on low heat for more than half the day, then served them with butter and sugar, a dish called kambulo, for dinner. He made amazing goat meatballs, amazing everything. Even the camel tasted excellent. My favorite drink was red rooibos tea, which is naturally sweet and nutty. We never ate our MREs at Pasha. Had we known the food would be so good, we could have left the heavy, space-consuming packages of MREs at the Army compound.
And that was part 2 of CIA Safe House Hunting for Aidid from SEAL Team 6. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.